If you're interested in exploring these topics further, learning and connecting with like-minded individuals, check out the 3 Patreon discussion groups available. Just visit theinfinitesparkofbeing.com and click the participate button. I also offer a free meditation group online every Sunday evening at 8 p.m. Eastern. Just go to any of my social media profiles for the link found in my link tree. There's no pressure to be on camera or to actively participate in any of these groups. Just come and listen and enjoy. Join an online spiritual community of everyday people committed to understanding the human experience more deeply through spiritual practices that we can apply to our everyday lives. Join us. Welcome to the Infinite Spark of Being podcast. My name is Keith Welsh, and today we're going to discuss the topic of mind metaphysics. Mind metaphysics isn't just about how the mind works, it's deeper than that. It's how the mind connects us to the divine, to the creative force of the universe. It's understanding the mind's role in manifestation in the law of attraction. So from the power of positive thinking in the Christian West to the spiritual understandings of Hinduism and Buddhism in the East, we're going to look at how these concepts come together. We're also going to take a look at some key figures who have helped shape Western thought. People like Norman Vincent Peale and Florence Scovel Shinn, who I've mentioned many times before. We're also going to look at how Eastern traditions have approached this idea for millennia. I truly believe that we as Westerners need to look at the history of this movement to fully understand our spirituality in 2025. So to start off, let's first understand the meaning of the word metaphysics. Metaphysics comes from the Greek word meta, which means beyond or after, and physica, which means physics or nature. Over time, the meaning has shifted a bit, but at its core, metaphysics is all about exploring the deeper questions, the nature of reality, existence, and the universe itself. So I believe that we are in a very special place. Speaking specifically as an American, we're in a place culturally where a lot of things converge. And that's a very special thing. While we do have some pretty hard-lined, homogenized ideas in our culture, our karma, for some of us, has us exposed to a lot of ideas. And it's a very powerful thing. This idea that we need to fall solely into one box or another is very scary. That being said, we also can't afford to dig a bunch of shallow wells. For myself, I've done both. I've run headlong into one path and been very dedicated to it. And I've also dug a lot of shallow wells. And where I'm at now is that there's just got to be a balance, and that balance is going to be different for all of us. So first off, so let's define what we mean by mind metaphysics. At its essence, it's the exploration of how thoughts, beliefs, and consciousness shape our experience of reality. And that's consciousness with a small c, not a big C. So really, we're talking about consciousness as a cognitive faculty of the mind. It's about having the nerve to ask big questions without the acculturated voice in our head telling us to stay in our lanes or to quote unquote trust the science. These are questions like, does the mind create reality or does it just interpret it? That's a big one, right? That's the difference in being Ram Dass or that insufferable wet blanket Richard Dawkins. Another big one would be, how do thoughts influence our circumstances? This is a pretty heavy one, since our experience is a habit of the mind, a habit of thinking. How are our circumstances related to that? Related to the way the mind thinks and our experience? You see, it starts to all become the mind. And another one that is probably controversial or difficult for some people, but can belief act as a bridge to the divine or universal consciousness? This is one of those act as if deals, right? After all, belief is basically a non-quantifiable thought experiment. You can't really prove belief. That's what Carl Jung found out when he realized that he wasn't going to be able to prove the existence of God within a clinical setting, and he tried very hard. Instead, he resigned to the idea that if one acted as if there was a God, they'd live a better life. he realized that the belief alone can change that person's experience of the world. And in a world where, or a culture where we need everything to be objectively true and real, and moreover true for everyone, not just us, that's a very difficult thing to deal with. So in Western traditions, mind metaphysics usually focuses on manifestation and using the mind or our thoughts to create success, health, and happiness, or for some, to get cars, money, and girls. Often a cold plunge is involved, or maybe a hot sauna. Sometimes micro-learning instead of doom scrolling for some. Some people find that TRT and supplements help. I'm making a joke, and that's a joke that only our male listeners will understand. Our feeds are inundated with... it's so funny when you think about what the male Instagram or social media feed looks like as opposed to female. Ours is... insane when it comes to manifestation and law of attraction. It's quite hilarious. Also, I just know that I make this joke after I've worked out with kettlebells, Indian clubs, and a mace today. So I supplement with the best of them. Anyway, in Eastern traditions, it's more about transcending the mind to reach a state of enlightenment, or what universal truth, unity consciousness, which, us Americans, we love that idea, and the East has obviously done that. I mean, if you look at India, right? Like, they've clearly surpassed us spiritually. And if I would just climb down out of my American exceptionalism ivory tower, I'd probably see that. I mean, the entire East practically levitates. They don't even need cell phones, or they definitely don't need electric cars, or they don't need oil. Anyway, East, West, we're all just grinding and hustling and collecting our stacks. I'm making jokes here, but the truth is that the egregore of comfort and need is clearly possessed all of us. So anyway, we're going to take a look at both, but let's start with the Western perspective. The origins of mind metaphysics in the West can actually be found in Christianity, believe it or not. Take Proverbs chapter 23, verse 7. Now, these are the verses I'm going to give you they're ones that people find typically that point to the power of positive thinking or the law of attraction. There's more, but this podcast is probably going to be pretty long anyway. So Proverbs chapter 23, verse 7, as a man thinketh in his heart, so he is, or so is he. Whichever translation. I like "so he is." I think that's probably a typo in Proverbs. I don't know. This is the idea that our inner thoughts, the things that, kind of rest in the back of our mind, shape who we are. And ultimately, that is perception, the way we regard, understand, and interpret. And that is ultimately the reality that we experience. Similarly, Jesus talked about, he talked a lot about faith. Right? There's that verse about, essentially, I wouldn't need to do all these crazy miracles if you fuckers would just have faith. That's also a paraphrase. But in Mark chapter 11, verse 24, he says, whatever you ask for in prayer, believe that you have received it and it will be yours. I mean, Louise Hay couldn't have said it better herself. And I love Louise Hay. But this is kind of what I've talked about in the past about journaling or affirmations, mantra. It's not Sanskrit mantras, obviously, but you're not, like, if you were to say, and we'll get more into this later, but if you were to say, please God, give me a new bike, right? That's not really prayer. But if you say, dear Lord, thank you for this new bike, but you don't have the bike, that's what it's talking about. And since the mind is this, it's the result of being a soul, it's a spiritual aspect to our birth. It does have a delay though. And it's supposed to have a delay for the purposes of being in a human body. So faith isn't just this passive belief, but it's an active creative force. When we are in that active, faithful place, we are in the mode of creation. We are tuning into that creative force the creative force of this realm of God. And from this perspective, from this understanding, the mind becomes a tool for aligning with God's will. And when we align with that, whether we call it God, source, or the universe, our very holy and divine subconscious mind will manifest these, what you could call blessings or curses, depending on how you're using this thing. Now, if you go back into a certain era of our history as Americans, you find that the Bible was most certainly taught this way. In fact, a great book on this is by one of my favorite authors, Mitch Horowitz, and it's titled Occult America. I love Mitch Horowitz. It's all of his books. The Miracle Club, they're all fantastic. And the thing I love about Mitch Horowitz's books is it turns you on to a bunch of other stuff. He's more of a historian than anything. But it's a look at our religious history in this country, and it is amazing. However, over time, these ideas of, positive thinking, mind metaphysics, they took on a life of their own. They left home, so to speak, and evolved into what we now know as the power of positive thinking. This was a whole era in Western history that I urge you to look more into. And we're going to cover a lot of it here. And my hope is that this episode motivates you to learn more about it. Anyway, when we see the evolution of these teachings, we notice how they kind of moved beyond the theological realm. They became tools for personal empowerment, helping people to believe in their ability to co-create their lives in partnership with the divine. Or again, if you're a wet blanket, the power of the neuroplasticity of the Johnson rod that runs through the center of our hyperbaric cortex of our giraffe neck, which is found in the asshole of Neil deGrasse Tyson. Seriously, though, this shift helped a lot of people that were maybe not inclined to the mystical, people like Neil deGrasse Tyson. It helped them learn to apply this way of thinking to the quote-unquote real world, mainly through sales. Salespeople love this shit, but it laid the groundwork for more practical, everyday application of mind metaphysics in the West. And I think it pushed science to look more into the mind. And that's a good thing. And look, we can't escape our karma here in the States. Ours is a curriculum of learning to live with and around excess in a way that doesn't swallow us whole. So let's move on. So in the 19th century, there's this thing that comes along called the New Thought movement. And it was and is a belief that blends Christian principles with metaphysical ideas. It kind of calls back to the old days of the burned over district of upstate New York, which is where a lot of this kind of thing comes from. Mormonism comes from there. And that's what the book Occult America talks a lot about. Anyway, what the New Thought movement's belief is that our thoughts and beliefs directly influence our reality. And for some of you, that's, well, like, no shit, but at the time, it was crazy. But what we need to understand here is that what we as individuals experience as reality is a subjective experience that is the result of the way in which our personal subconscious mind perceives the world around it. It's subjective. And what the New Thought movement and all these various offshoots believe is that we can bend and shape our experience, thus creating a change in our experience of what we perceive as reality. Remember, this is the mind. This world, this planet, this experience, your relationship, the way you experience a relationship, the way you experience your job, the way you experience politics, it is the mind. And that's a very steep thing. It gets us into some different topics that might be difficult, and we'll probably get more into that. But remember, this is the mind. So let me give you some folks to look up and do some research on. Out of principle, we have to start with Phineas Quimby, and not just because his name is, wow, amazing, but it's because a lot of people think of him as the father of the New Thought movement. Now, in my opinion, as I was just saying, this gets into some really dicey territory. Quimby believed that illness and suffering were caused by incorrect beliefs. This gets steep. This is still, or at least last time I checked, what the New Thought movement still believed. And to be fair, the more we learn about the human body and its relationship to the mind, as difficult as some of these things might be to think about, we find that it might be true. He taught that by aligning the mind with divine consciousness or divine truth, individuals could experience healing from illness. They could experience these massive transformations, things like that. But this is one of those things that I feel really conflicted on, and I feel the need to address. I personally have experienced this idea to be true when it comes to certain injuries that I've had in the past. Now, was that injury caused because I wasn't aligned with divine truth or because I had incorrect beliefs? No. However, I will say this is just my experience, that the reoccurrence of pain for seemingly no real reason did coincide with mental stress. For example, I sustained a back injury ages ago while training jiu-jitsu. Then I re-injured it 2 more times while training before I finally quit. Well, the first time I injured it, I was given a book by a guy named Dr. John Sarno. It was called Back Pain is in the Mind, which when I first received it, I thought, well, how about you fuck yourself? Anyway, I didn't read it until the second time I hurt myself, and I read it out of sheer boredom. But what Sarno was saying was kind of interesting. So for an example, let's say you break your arm, your arm heals, but you still experience pain. You go from doctor to doctor and no one can tell you they're like, look, your arm's fine. Your arm's healed. There's no problems here. Well, what John Sarno is saying is that the pain is due to things like unsolved or unresolved trauma, stress in the mind. Another interesting book would be How the Body Keeps Score. But anyway, Sarno believed that it all kind of leaked out through that energy, injury. That it's I don't want to say weak spot in the body, but it's a compromised spot. So in a way, you could say that it's from a lack of ease in the mind or the presence of dis-ease, right? The last time my back really slowed me down was the Christmas before last, where I was really stressed out, and wouldn't you know, my back went out, as they say. I've noticed this in the past, that when my mind is burdened, meaning that I'm carrying something around with me, something that I need to let go of or put down, that's when my back really bothers me. So it's something to consider. But I do feel that this thought process can create a lot of undue suffering and confusion. So tread lightly. And next up is Ralph Waldo Emerson, a transcendentalist philosopher that really promoted self-reliance and the importance of realizing our connection to God, to the divine. He wrote, "What lies behind us and what lies before us are tiny matters compared to what lies within us." To him, the mind wasn't just a tool, but it was a reflection of universal consciousness. He also was an advocate and avid reader of the Bhagavad Gita. He believes everyone should give it a shot. He actually wrote a poem called Brahma and then suggested it be renamed Jehovah, since everyone seemed so confused at the time by the term Brahma. Now we have Norman Vincent Peale. He was actually the guy that brought these ideas into the mainstream with a book called The Power of Positive Thinking. Since he was a practicing minister, he blended Christian faith with practical techniques for cultivating a positive mindset, things like visualization and affirmations. This is where we get into things like prosperity gospel, which is problematic for some. I think it is. And you could trace the origins back to Phineas Quimby, but I kind of think that this is where it gets sideways. Now, I'm not an expert on prosperity gospel, but using the acquisition of material goods as proof that you are aligned with God is a very slippery place to be. I'm not going to say anything else about it, which means I probably have more to say about it, but yeah, all of this gets slippery, right? All of this kind of skirts the edges of wish granting, which isn't what the point is. The point is to transform your experience of life. You can manifest or attract material into your life, but if the mind is still perceiving difficulty, hardship, loneliness, etc., then you're just going to be the same person with a nicer car which we all know doesn't really last, and you're still going to think everybody around you is a motherfucker, and you're still going to be living in a world of motherfuckers in a McLaren, I guess. I don't know. So one of my favorite authors, Florence Scovel Shinn, her work, particularly The Game of Life and How to Play It, that book is amazing. But her most famous book, I think it's her most famous book, and is absolutely one of my favorites, is called The Secret Door to Success. It really speaks about the power of language. She taught that speaking affirmations could align us with divine principles, and it would lead to prosperity and joy. And I'll say it again, just because he's such a great source. When it comes to this stuff, Mitch Horowitz, he's the guy. He's the guy I mentioned earlier that wrote Occult America. And there's a lot of great interviews with him out there. Actually, Duncan Trussell of the Duncan Trussell Family Hour podcast interviews him a few times and really asks him the kind of questions that if you're listening to this podcast, you'll want to hear the answers to. So check that out. But he does a really good job of putting all this stuff together. But the reason I said that is because he, I guess, has the rights to a lot of these works and does the audiobooks on Audible. He does a lot of the Florence Scovel Shinn stuff, but I wanted to say something. A lot of the titles to these, like Secret Door to Success and The Game of Life, they can sound very materialistic, but I promise you they're not. There's layers to them. So anyway, look up Mitch Horowitz, look up Duncan Trussell, and, see what he has to say on this podcast. And again, Duncan really asks him the questions that people like us want to hear the answers to. And while we're talking about Mitch Horowitz, we have to talk about Neville Goddard, because Mitch Horowitz has done a lot to put Neville Goddard back into the world. And what Neville's teachings really emphasized was the power of the imagination, that it was the ultimate creative force that shaped our reality. What he taught was deeply rooted in biblical scripture. He was blending, once again, Christian principles with the idea that imagination is the divine aspect of human consciousness. He had this concept that I love called living in the end. And what it taught was that embodying the feeling of the desire, that it's already been fulfilled, right? That you already got it, that is the way we manifest these desires into our life, that we imagine what it would feel like to have that thing already done or to have acquired whatever it is. His best book, in my opinion, is titled Feeling is the Secret. And you can also find thousands of hours of his talks on YouTube, which is really fun, since when he was a boy, he was told by a teacher that no one would ever want to hear him speak because he had a weird voice. He was from Barbados. So people thought that he sounded weird. I don't really get it. I think he sounds fine, but you be the judge. Go find him on YouTube. There's hours of this guy. And finally, the queen mother of this whole deal, in my opinion, Louise Hay. Louise Hay was a pioneer in the self-help movement. She, at least in the modern day, she brought the principles of mind metaphysics into the world of personal healing. She was a part of the transcendental meditation movement. She was personally a student of Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. Also, another fun fact, apparently she cured herself of cancer with her mind. I thought she was full of shit too, but hey, go find out for yourself. Personally, I love the lady. Her book called You Can Heal Your Life talks a lot about the connection between thought patterns, emotions, and physical health. She taught that self-love and affirmations could transform your entire life. She was the queen of mixing all this stuff together. I wrote her off as just some warm, fuzzy, feel-good nonsense, but the more I learned about that woman, the more I realized that I was a fool. Trauma responses, anxiety, ruminating thinking, grief and loss, stress, these are all reoccurring patterns in the mind. They're often the result of reacting the same way over and over again. Why do we do this? Because the mind believes the past is still here, happening now, causing the nervous system to respond accordingly. What the mind perceives, the body feels. Mind Transformation and Restructuring, MTR, offers a pathway to release these patterns. It guides both the mind and the nervous system out of these repetitive cycles and into a lighter, freer way of being. If this resonates with you, feel free to reach out via direct message or through the contact section at theinfinitesparkofbeing.com. You don't have to live the way you've been living. Change is possible. By the way, like Neville Goddard, you can find a lot of her stuff on YouTube. There are just these great morning affirmation recordings that she'd done over the years that are amazing. Her voice is so soothing. Honestly, really sweet and uplifting, so check it out. And she started Hay House Publishing with Dr. Wayne Dyer, if you know him. If you've bought certain self-help books, they probably are from Hay House, honestly. They've done so much. So these thinkers really emphasized that the mind's creative power isn't something mystical or reserved for the elite. It's accessible to everyone. And I know this might sound hyperbolic, but this is the birthright of every human that has taken birth in this realm. And it's rooted in our connection to the divine. And before we get too lazy and think we can YouTube our way to liberation, you'll notice that they always stressed the importance of discipline and focus. Just like, a farmer tends to their crops, we got to tend to our thoughts. We got to plant seeds, that way the right things grow. We got to plant these seeds, like we got to use faith and gratitude, positivity, all that stuff that we hate to hear about, but it's true. It's true and it works. So the Western approach, particularly through the lens of New Thought, also leaned into the idea of success. Success wasn't just material wealth, but it was a well-rounded life of health and happiness and honestly a contribution to society, not just being a suck. And even in the most well-known of these books, which would be Napoleon Hill's Think and Grow Rich, it's only about money and success in business on the surface. It's actually a deceptively spiritual text. It touches on some very esoteric ideas that won't really be obvious to the casual self-help reader. Either way, this topic is something that has gotten really warped nowadays. A lot of these books got into the wrong hands, and I think it became misused by our influencer culture. I mean, I don't want to sound like everyone shouldn't have access to this stuff, but again, we're seeing what happens to a culture with no spiritual guidance. This is what I was talking about in my Substack essay titled "Americans, the Spiritual Latchkey Kids of the Western World." In fact, now that I'm saying it, I might release that audio as a part 2 to this. So look for that. Now, while the West was discovering the power of the mind, or at least finally talking about this in its spiritual aspects, the East had already been exploring it for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. Hindus and Buddhists, they've known about this forever, and their culture offered some really deep insights into the nature of the mind and its role in spiritual practice. So let's look at Hinduism first. In Hinduism, the mind, or manas, M-A-N-A-S, is seen as both a tool. It's a tool that we experience the world through, but it's also the source of illusion, Maya, M-A-Y-A. And to give you your weekly dose of UFO talk, the craft that they're always talking about on that ever so educational CIA psyop known as Ancient Aliens is called a Vimana, V-I-M-A-N-A. Now, I'm not going to go into my semi-weekly rant about what a jabber-jawed babbling idiot Billy Carson and that other fucktard with the hair is, but this is not mentioned in the Bhagavad Gita, as Krishna and Arjuna are not flying around. We know that they are in a wheeled chariot, as Krishna broke a wheel off at one point and attempts to crush Bhishma's skull with it, but was then stopped by Arjuna, who reminded him of his vow to participate in the fight as a charioteer and not a fighter. By the way, that part is in the Mahabharata, which is the larger text that the Bhagavad Gita comes out of, which people like that dipshit Billy Carson would know if they took a little time to do some actual research and reading, though I do realize he's spending hours hunkered down in a dusty old library, hunched over a big old dusty chair, poring over some ancient cuneiform, attempting to decipher another misunderstood text before going on to yet another platform and speaking with absolute conviction about something that this dipshit has little understanding of. So back to Vimanas. Sorry to take you down this road, but hey, we're just trying to get through this and trying to be educational. So Pushpaka Vimana was a flying chariot that was stolen by Ravana from Kubera, who was the god of wealth. And why is this interesting? This is interesting. Sorry, we're doing this. Strap in, we're doing this. This is interesting because the god of wealth is a nature spirit in Hinduism. And this is interesting because he was a yaksha. Yakshas are nature spirits. Bear with me. Yakshas are small gnome-like beings or dwarves. So run that through your Western Fey folk Jacques Vallée UFO filter. So Vimanas are flown by what you might call demigods. Not all yakshas fly craft, as some of these ancient alien theorists might tell you. It is, however, a vehicle used by higher beings. And the one in the Ramayana was not designed or built by an Indian leprechaun, but it was built by the divine architect who's Brahma's son, Vishwakarma. The point I was trying to make is that this thing, Kubera, it's like an Indian leprechaun. Anyway, so VI means apart from. Mana means thought, so Vimana means that which moves apart or moves through the mind. So that's a nugget of information that should make you super annoying at parties. Anyway, back to the mind. In the Bhagavad Gita, we learned that the mind can be our greatest ally or our greatest enemy. In chapter 6, Krishna says, for one who has conquered the mind is the best of friends, but for one who has failed to do so, the mind will remain the greatest enemy. How many times have I heard clients in rehabs, at least, say things like, my mind is trying to kill me. Your mind is not your friend. Your ego is not your amigo. Well, I would remind you, as Swami Vivekananda said, the mind is a fantastic servant, but a terrible master. Now, I would say that you are as much your thoughts as you are the tools you use or the car you drive. It is a tool. Learn to use it. So the ultimate goal of Hinduism is to transcend the egoic mind and align with Brahman or universal consciousness or source. So these practices like meditation and mantra recitation are designed to quiet the mind. And when we quiet the mind, we let some of those deeper truths about the self and the nature of reality and all that good stuff bubble up to the surface. Hinduism also introduces the concept of chitta vritti, or mental fluctuations, which cloud our perception of reality. Meditation's aim is to still these fluctuations, allowing us to experience the truth with a capital T that sits behind this whole thing. Think about that. Fluctuations in the mind, right? What's that great Pema Chodron quote? You are the sky. Everything else is just the weather, which I love. Now, Buddhism takes a slightly different approach. The Buddha taught that the mind creates our experience of reality. It is the source of our suffering and confusion. One of his most famous teachings states, we are shaped by our thoughts. We become what we think. This is an actual statement made by Buddha for those of you that are really only getting your Dharma through memes. What we learn is that through a dedicated practice of meditation, we learn to observe our thoughts without attachment. This liberates us from the habits of attraction and aversion. What we are attempting to do is to transcend the dualistic mind, the mind that separates us from understanding our essence, and realize the nature of reality as interconnected and impermanent. That's it. It's all impermanent. It's definitely connected. So what we're doing is transcending the ego. We're turning the ego, because reality testing is one of its functions. Reality testing is that aspect of the ego that tells you you are separate. And we're learning to use it as a tool. Now, for those of you that don't know, this practice of non-attachment is central to Buddhist teachings. And when we learn to observe the mind without identifying with it, we begin to dissolve the false sense of self or the illusion of permanence. And that illusion is what leads to suffering. So these Eastern traditions emphasize that the mind isn't inherently good or bad. It's a tool, and its value depends on how you use it. It's like a hammer. We can either create something or we can destroy something with it. So how do these perspectives come together? We've got the West focusing on using the mind to improve life circumstances, and we have the East emphasizing using the mind as a gateway to transcendence. So here's where they converge. Both of these traditions agree that the thoughts of the mind shape reality. Whether it's the affirmations of the New Thought movement or the mindfulness of Buddhism, the mind is seen as a creative force. In the West, we have Christianity teaching the power of faith. In the East, we see an emphasis on surrender to the universal consciousness. Both of these paths teach the importance of aligning with a higher power, but the idea of releasing, letting go, having faith in the practice. In the West, we use mind metaphysics for practical outcomes, right? Health, wealth, happiness. While in the East, the focus is more on spiritual liberation. Now, if we put them together, we have something very potent, and this has been my focus for years. It is truly being in the world, but not of the world. You have to do both. Also, I realized that this might sound like the mind metaphysics of the West is only good for the acquisition of goods and services, but I've personally found that an understanding of this sort of thing enhanced my spiritual practice, and having a good understanding of spiritual practice and spiritual literature enhanced my ability to navigate the material world without so much spiritual bypassing. A grounded spiritual understanding, I believe, has allowed me to stand close to a lot of fires without getting burned. So how can we exercise a practical application of these insights in our day-to-day lives? Well, a great place to start with this whole thing is affirmations. Now, I'm not going to get into the nitty-gritty of each method. These are topics for episodes all by themselves, but let's look at them. So the word affirmation comes from the word affirm. Affirm means to state as a fact. We can also link the use of affirmations with mantra recitation, and the word mantra in Sanskrit means that which protects or mind tool. So think of it as a tool that you would use to protect your mind against anything opposite of the mantra, the thing that you are affirming. Now, we always think of these things, mantras, affirmations, whatever, as positive statements. However, if I keep repeating negative statements about myself, the world, or whatever else, then I'm making an affirmation of it. I'm affirming it to be a fact. I'm telling the universe, source, God, I'm telling them that this is how it is. And furthermore, I'm making a mantra of it, protecting my mind against any positive ideas or perspectives that might conflict with my affirmation, that might conflict with my perspective, my point of view, how I see myself, how I see the world. This stuff can be dangerous. The mind is powerful, and language is a cognitive faculty of the mind, the same mind that this reality is made of. This means that language is a powerful, powerful thing that absolutely matters. If we become aware of our speech, notice the way we describe ourselves and the world, then we can transform the way we experience all of it. And having a dedicated practice of affirmations or mantras will reprogram our subconscious mind. What I also want you to think about is that those little self-deprecating remarks that you make about yourself over time, those can hold you back. You see, that subconscious mind, the mind that is responsible for your experience in the world, does not have a sense of humor. This is a truth that I have had to realize the hard way. So trust me. Words matter. A great Neville Goddard quote that illustrates that is, I will be is a confession that I am not. When I say, for instance, I will be healthy, I'm saying that I'm not healthy, right? But I'm not healthy. I'm sick. Yes. Okay. But the problem is that the mind is working on a delay. You have to speak about something in a present tense positive way. But is it that a lie? Yes, it is a lie. Sure. I don't think that people see what they're doing when they think about it this way, right? We are already lying to ourselves about how wonderful and divine we are. So why not lie about this? Since when did we become sticklers for the truth? We buy into their lies, the power structure, the corporatocracy. So just lie about this. At least it's fucking moving you in the right direction. It'll be fine. Trust me, it'll be fine. So the practice of affirmations would be done 1 to 3 times a day. Obviously, the more we repeat them, the better off we'll be. So I'd recommend times during the day that are easily achievable. Try to set yourself up for success. Then during the day, if you think about them, like at off times or whatever, say them. Personally, I say them 3 times each. So let's look at an example. I live a contented, abundant life of opportunity and fulfillment. If this is one of several affirmations, then during my dedicated times to work with my affirmations, I would say it or write it down in my journal 3 times. Some would say that you are making the declaration 3 times for the 3 worlds, meaning that you are affirming it to God, affirming it to the material world, and then affirming it to the underworld. You are putting these 3 worlds on notice. Now, there are a lot of journaling practices. What I just mentioned is one example where you would write each affirmation 3 times and maybe do that 3 times a day or maybe twice. Maybe once in the morning and once in the evening. Maybe your third, if you don't have time or a chance to engage with your journal, might just be you saying them to yourself. There are obviously no hard and fast rules here, but there is solid research showing that when we write things down, we tend to remember them better. There's a link between what our hand does and what our brain remembers. I've also mentioned in the past filling up an entire page of a journal with it, which again, that's an option. It takes a little more time, but the more times, the better, I guess. I don't know. Give it a shot, right? It's not going to hurt. And just DM me, let me know how it works. I do want to say this before we move on. Neville Goddard really pushed the idea that feeling these statements was vital to manifesting them. So to use our example affirmation, I know what it felt like when I was content once. Even if it was just for a minute, I felt it, right? I know what it feels like to have more than enough, or I can at least imagine it. I know what a great opportunity feels like. I know what fulfillment feels like. And if you're one of these people right now saying, I've never had anything work out, it's all just been one big uphill battle, I've never been content, then motherfucker, use your goddamn imagination. Or start with a fucking gratitude list, but nobody wants to hear it. And not to pull out my inner David Goggins, but goddamn. And if that's your mantra, good luck, right? By the way, I'd also like to point out the fact that it's working, so you see this stuff is real, right? Congrats, you're more powerful than you thought. So the next piece is obviously meditation, the creation of space. And I'm not going to go too deep here because, my God, I've done it a million times. But in order to break the habitual negative thought patterns like the ones I just mentioned, you have to have some sort of space between what's happening, what our mind thinks about what's happening, and what we do about what's happening, right? If we're going to create a new experience for ourselves, there has to be some kind of space. It just can't feel like it's coming at us at 100 miles an hour. And when I say do about what's happening, sometimes it's not a physical action. Sometimes the do part is replacing the same old self-pity thinking with something empowered and strong, something positive. Also, I'm not talking about toxic positivity like one of these insufferable fucks that has cupcakes and unicorns falling out of their assholes. I'm talking about that stick-to-itiveness, that World War II Rosie the Riveter kind of thing where whatever it is, we knuckle down, we do what's right, and we don't get lost in our sad sack, wet blanket bullshit. It's not going to help you. So sit your ass down, right? Get quiet, follow your breath, and for God's sake, shut the fuck up for 10 minutes. I'm not sure why I just got so aggressive. Anyway, just fucking meditate. So our third piece here is what some might call visualization, but what we're really talking about is imagination. This is something that Florence Scovel Shinn speaks about. And if you can't even imagine or visualize what it would look like to live a different life and imagine what it might feel like to experience this different way of being in the world, then how in the name of the Lord God Almighty do you think this is going to happen? Well, the answer is that it won't happen. So right? There's your answer. This isn't going to work if you can't even just let go and use your imagination. In Tibetan Buddhism, there are a lot of these very complex visualizations that accompany these practices. And some would say, oh, it's so that we may envision the Pure Land so that at the time of death, we go there. And maybe that's true, but what I've found in my life, whether it was as a practitioner of these practices, as an artist or whatever, imagination is a muscle that gets stronger the more we use it. And what that muscle does is it allows us to visualize things more clearly. And the more clearly we see it, the easier it will be to bring into our lives. Now, to that point, sometimes we go through a bunch of really shitty things and we don't think that they serve a purpose. But what I have found is that those really shitty things, whether it was a crappy job, a bad relationship, shitty leadership, shitty living situations, they were all absolutely vital in visualizing what I wanted, right? You got to know exactly what you don't want in order to know exactly what you do want. And it's as simple as that. And these lessons might not happen on your timeline, and you might think that, well, I'm running out of time for this or running out of time for that. But this shit is already on a schedule, and all you can really do is float with the current and act accordingly, right? Like mindful action. Now that I've dispensed some truly vague information, the visualization of white light and things like that during meditation, this is what we talked about last week. Well, they apply here. The visualization of those things during meditation works the same way as you imagining a better job or a better relationship, right? And I think the last thing that needs to be said about these practices is let go, right? Faith. There can't be doubt. Doubt has to die. Doubt is a negative force that will thwart all of your effort. What I'm talking about, right? It's faith, it's belief. So if you believe that all things are meant to be, that God is working, the universe is working, that there is a Lord, in other words, a law, an order to things, then you have to put your money where your mouth is. You do the thing and let go of the outcome, right? Karma yoga. You have to trust, right? But I can't trust. My entire life, people have shut the fuck up, let it go. Remember, this works. You've been manifesting bullshit your whole life with your negative attitude, negative visualizations, your negative language, and here we are. I know this firsthand. So you, right, you negative, of all people should have the most faith. You are a strong and powerful manifester. You have manifested all of this nonsense up until now. The problem is you've just been doing it backwards. So turn it around. So in the end, mind metaphysics isn't just a philosophical point of view. It's a way of life, a practice, and a spiritual one at that. It teaches us the power of our thoughts. Just take a moment and look at the power of your negative thinking. Look where it's gotten you. Look what it showed you, where it directed your attention. And lo and behold, you found the horrible thing. You found the stressful situation. You found the bad relationship. You found the problems. These negative thoughts didn't manifest themselves because they're part of some overarching truth. These thoughts appeared because they were the only ones. Your mind is a habit. However, if we learn to observe the mind and change those thoughts, then and only then can we transform our reality. I love you. I love you. I love you. We are not strangers. We've been doing this for a while now. So thank you, thank you, thank you. If you enjoyed this content and would like to support its creation, visit theinfinitesparkofbeing.com. There you can explore the various ways to get involved and support this work. Click the About button, read a little bit about me, and see what I have to offer you through the one-on-one sessions. Don't forget to check out the Patreon tiers, where we're building a community of everyday people with not so everyday interests. You'll also find the online apparel store. And as always, head over to the participate button and join us. Together, we're growing a community of spiritual seekers just like you.